Hello everyone. If it's your first time to the channel, welcome, and if it's not, welcome back. I really appreciate all of the support lately. If you enjoy the video or the content, please like, comment, and subscribe as they really help out for the algorithm. Today we have a really interesting video as we're playing what's a very fun deck in Oden. Oden, while it's not the most competitive green deck, it is still really viable, and in OPO3 has actually, in Japan and Asia, has actually topped some events and done really well. So now let's start with the deck list. For the leader itself, we have Oden, who his ability is that you can trash a Wano card and then you can reactivate 2 Dawn. With that, we run a really heavy Wano package in 4 Kozuki Momonosuke, which is a searcher. Some more Wano package that we run are 4 of the Nekomamushi, 4 Izo, for Raizo, run 2 of the 3-drop blocker Cat Viper, 4 Okiku, and then the card that kind of makes Oden better or viable is Kinemon. Kinemon is really strong in that, like, first, it's a 6-cost, 6,000 power, and on play, you can also play a 3-cost Akazaya 9 character, which that can be your Okiku, your Cat Viper, your Raizo, and also when you attach a Dawn under it and attack, you can restand one of the Akazaya 9. So you can Okiku swing Kinemon, restand the Okiku, swing again, which is really powerful. Outside of that, then we supplemented it with the Supernova package. So you have 4 Bonnies as your searcher. You run 2 Beige blockers, 2 Killer blockers, 4 Scratchman Apoos for extra 2k counters, 4 of the 5-drop Trafalgar Law, just because you can play it, bounce your Momos, your Bonnies back to hand to play an Okiku or another 3-drop. We're playing the 8-drop Oden, which is not a Supernova, but it is a Wano. It's just a really strong boss monster. If you can play it on curve, it's just super strong. And then we're running 4 of the Punk Gibson, which ideally you want to, when you use Oden's ability, you leave the 2 Dawn up, and then that'll allow you to play the Punk Gibson itself. Some of the cards that we're playing can be substituted. The Killers, the Beiges, and the Nekos, so we're running them in 2s. You could change them out for a variety of different options. You can up the Beige, you can up the Killer, you can drop some of them out. But this is what we're playing for today. Let's go into our matches. Now, for the first match, we have a match against Whitebeard. Red is super common, so you're going to see red in most matchups, as that's what everyone wants to play. It's one of the strongest colors. I have a Momo, so I just kind of play the Momo. They're going second, so they can't Vista it. They do play Seaquake, though. Seaquake isn't super common, so wasn't really like guarding for it. But I do have another Momo, and I have another Bonnie, or I drew a Bonnie. So I'm going to play the Bonnie, try to draw, see what I can get. And I probably should have played the Momo there, but I didn't want to lose the Momo yet. Where here I know he'll probably attack the Bonnie because he doesn't want me to keep getting value. And so Bonnie was able to get me a card and serve as a blocker in a way. That's ideally, in an ideal world. He happens to play the Vista, so it seems like he is playing a little bit of a heavier removal type build. Or it could be a Moby Dick, or the stage version. I took the life as I don't want to counter out too early. And then I draw a Beige for turn, put 1 Dawn under leader, swing for 6. Trying to get a card out of my opponent's hand, or take the life. That would be perfect. Yep. So, like I said, it is the stage version, and the giveaway to it, sometimes when you're playing against Whitebeard, is if they take the life, they're most likely playing the stage version, as they just want to get down to 1 life as soon as possible for its effect to activate. If you're playing against a Strawbeard version, they're probably going to counter out of most of it, as they don't want to go too low in life too soon. My opponent puts 2 Dawn under the Vista and swings for 5. The only 1k counter I have in hand are the Momo and the Killer. So I decided to use a 2K. I still have another 2K in Izo. My opponent puts 2 Dawn under his leader and then swings for 8, which that I'm just going to take. I knew I was going to take 1 life there for the 2, so I just kind of countered out of the easier one to counter out of. Pass his turn, and I draw in a Pooh for my turn. I swing for 5 at the Vista. See if he's going to give me any cards. He has 2 Dawn up, so they could be Radical Beams. They could be Red Hawks. It was a Radical Beam, so that's always, we take those trades. So it takes a lot more Dawn to try to attack his leader. So I swing again for another 5. He uses another Radical Beam. Then I play my Law, put the Okiku back into hand, replay the Okiku, and then probably play the Killer Blocker. I was considering also playing the Momo. I have 2 blockers already on board with the Law and the Beige. And so if he decides to attack it with the Vista, I can block with the Law, and then if he attacks with Leader at my Law, I can use my Beige. And so that's why I decided to play the Momo there instead of the Killer. My opponent's at 8 Dawn now, so he could play his Ace. He plays a Squad though. Takes a life and -4Ks my Trafalgar Law. He could Seaquake it now, which is what he does. And then plays a Marco. He still hasn't attacked, so he could attack with the Vista at my Momo, which he does. And then, so now this is where it gets a little bit more complicated for me. Definitely don't want to counter out of that, but I'm considering if I should block with the Beige. Decide not to, as I know he's probably still going to attack at life. Swings 8 at 5, I just take. And he passes. And so here my opponent doesn't have any Dawn up. So I could go for face, but him having 3 characters on board makes it to where he could go for game next turn. And so I really don't want to take that risk yet. So I just swing for 6, and then I play the Oden. I have a decent bit of counter in hand, so I'm not too scared of dying. I have 3 2Ks and then 3 1K counters. And then I do have the blocker in the Beige. She could get rid of with the Seaquake or a Vista, but he's used 3 removal cards already. And then I'll take that. I'll take him wasting Dawn to get rid of some of my cards. Swings for 7 first. I just counter out of it. I use an Okiku, or I'm sorry, an Izo and a Neko. There's certain cards you want to try to keep in hand here. And so you just kind of want to be careful what you counter out of, or counter out with. He swings for 8 at the Okiku, which leaves him just the Marco up. So for me to counter out of it, I have to do either 2 2Ks or give him 3 cards. And that's what I decide to do. The reason I decide to do that is if he wants to attack it with the Marco, then I'll just block with the Beige. And if not, then I still have the Izo, which I can use to rest his Marco for next turn. Draw Punk Gibson for turn. He plays his 9-drop, which bumps his leader up to 8K. And then just has 1 Dawn up, which could be a Radical Beam, could be a guard point. So here I'm just going to do the math, put 4 under my Oden, and swing for 12. It's just perfect, because even if he has a Radical Beam, he has to give me the Radical Beam and another card. And so he uses a guard point and a 2K with 3 cards in hand. I just restand my Oden and swing for 12 again. And that's a GG. Now for the second game, we're playing against Trafalgar Law, which has been doing really well in the meta lately. It just won an event this past weekend. It's just been really, really consistent. I go first, I play the beige, and then I just pass turn. In this matchup, you want to try to keep some of your cards that rest characters. So I had the Okiku, which is why, or the Izo, I'm sorry, which is why I decided to keep it. I rest the chopper that he has, and I swing at it for 5-2. My opponent uses 2/2Ks to save it, which, especially early game, we'll take that trade any day. He puts 1 down under his Tony chopper so that he can rest my blocker, and then swings 5K into the blocker to get rid of it. Which I'm okay with because it served its purpose. It still acted as a blocker. So instead of having to take cards out of hand or take a life, I was able to block a leader swing. Swing with my Izo first at his rested chopper. And my opponent decides to block with the chopper. And then I play my 5-drop, replay the Izo, and this way I'm guaranteed to kill one of his 2 characters. And that's what you want to do in this matchup. You want to keep attacking board, and get rid of the board as much as you can. Because if you keep attacking life, then your opponent's just going to keep getting resources. They'll take the first few hits for free. I get a Punk Gibson out of life. I use it to rest the Tony chopper so I can attack into it with the Izo. He plays a Zoro, swings for 5. I decide to take, and then plays a Vista to KO my Izo. I draw a Okiku for turn. So I could play the 6-drop Kinemon and then use its ability to play the Okiku. I swing for 5 first at the chopper. My opponent only has 1 card in hand, so I know that attacking for 7 at the Zoros, you're gonna just completely kill it. And then I play the Kinemon, play the Okiku, and with this, I should just be able to kind of steamroll my advantage. My opponent's down to 2 cards in hand. He still has 4 life, but with no resources, he's not going to be able to use his leader ability anytime soon. He puts 3 Dawn under the Vista and swings for 6, which I just used Neko to counter. Then he puts 3 Dawn under his leader and swings for 8, and I don't have the counter to get out of that, so I just let him go. I have no choice but to let him go. And then he plays a 2-drop Law, so it seems like he's playing the film package. I put 1 Dawn under the Okiku to swing at the Vista and then rest the Law. And just swing 5 at 3. No need to put any Dawn under my leader because my opponent has 1 card in hand. I swing for 6 in case it is a 2K and he decides to give it to me. We'll take that. That puts him down to 0 cards in hand. I use my bonding ability. And I'm looking to see how much Dawn I have left. See if I can play it this turn. I do have enough Dawn. So I decide to play it and restand the Okiku. That way my opponent can't get rid of it. And I pass. My opponent puts 5 Dawn under leader and swings for 10 at life, which I'll just take. And decides to pass. So I'm not entirely sure what he has in hand, but at this point that just cemented the game. Play the Bonnie ability, get a beige blocker, And then here I have multiple options. I can put Dawn under my characters and swing for 777. Normally you don't want to put too much Dawn under your characters to telegraph kind of what you're going to do. But when playing against red, you want to make sure that your characters aren't under 6k power because of a potential jet pistol out of life. My opponent takes the first two and I swing 7 and 7. Then I put 2 under leader to see if he decides to take. And if he didn't, then I might have just left the law up. But he took, so I at least swing with it. Try to go for game because it's going to guarantee some cards out of my opponent's hand. And then I play the beige. I use my leader ability with the Rhizo since I have 2 Punk Gibsons. And so that gives me a blocker and 2 Punk Gibsons up. Opponent uses 2 Bonnies. Then he uses an Otama to lower my law. Swings 5 at 4. I just use a 2k counter to save my law. And then he plays his own law to bounce the Otama to play a Zoro. And swings at my law again. I was considering using the Punk Gibson there or blocking. I decided to use the Punk Gibson. As this next turn, I'm just going to go for game. I could have blocked with the beige. Either didn't really matter. I have the Okiku to rest the law, so I mean, there's just nothing my opponent can do here. Just attack for 7 first, get the cards out of hand, and then just attack for 7 here again, and then that's going to be game. My opponent doesn't have any life, so I don't have to worry about jet pistols, which is why here I didn't attach it on early. But either way, that's a GG. And now we go on to game 3. For game 3, we have a matchup against Luffy. Luffy has grown in popularity a lot these last few weeks, especially since it won an event. And it's just, Luffy's really good at removal, controlling the board, and having it has a nice mix of board control / removal and aggression just because it's red. My opponent decides to go first. I play a Bonnie and a beige. That could be a little risky because he could have played a Vista, but if I just put one character on board, then that character is for sure going to die. He plays the Blunheim, which is a 2-drop 3k power blocker, plays a Chopper, and then uses leader ability to swing for 6, which I just take. And it seems like my opponent's playing a really defensive deck. I play the Neko to rest one of the blockers, then I attack into the blocker. Then I use my Bonnie and get a Law. And then I play a second Bonnie. I'm not scared to lose my first Bonnie since I have another one. If he has a Vista and then swings with leader at it, then that could clear it. But if that happens, it kind of is what it is. And then my opponent uses most of his turn to just get rid of 2 Bonnies. He plays an Atmos, uses leader ability to attach to his leader, and then swings for 6 at my rested Bonnie, which I just let go. And then he passes with 1 Dawn up. So it seems like my opponent here is playing the a Whitebeard version of Luffy. I swing for 5 on my opponent to see what he wants to do. If he wants to block or give me a card. He decides to block with one of the choppers. Then I use my Bonnie. My options here are a second Bonnie, a Gibson, or an Apu. I decide to take another Bonnie since I don't have any searchers in hand. And then I play my Law to bounce the Bonnie to hand and then play no Kiku. And that's where the 5-drop is just so strong. Whether that be restanding the Okikus, playing new cards, saving your Bonnies and your Searchers. My opponent plays a Vista to get rid of my Beige. Then plays another blocker. And then here he still has enough Dawn to swing for 7 with the Atmos by using Leader ability to attach to it, and 7 with the Luffy by attaching 2 Dawn to it. Which is what he decides to do. He swings 7 first. And I decide to take. And then he uses the Leader ability but doesn't attach a second Dawn. Just leaves 1 up. So he probably has a Guard Point or a Radical Beam. As last turn he also left 1 up. Here I use my Law to block and then just counter out with the Bonnie so I can save my 2Ks. And I get draw in Momo. I play the Neko to rest one of the blockers. I put 3 Dawn under my Okiku, so I can swing for 8 at the Atmos, and I use her ability to rest the other blocker. So here my opponent either has to give me the event, or he has to give me both cards to save the Atmos. And this play completely turns the flow of the game back into my favor, as that was really my opponent's only major attacker. He does give me the Guard Point though. So I'm kind of considering my options here. I decide to swing for 6 with my Law at the Atmos, which there my opponent lets go. And I swing with my first Neko at the Chopper to get rid of it. And I swing for 5 at the Blenheim to get rid of it as well. I play a Killer and I attach a Dawn to it. I've had 2 blockers in hand, which is why I wasn't scared to attack with my Law. Because even if I didn't have the Killer, I could have played the Neko, which would have been a blocker. My opponent only has 2 attackers, which are the Vista and his Leader. He attaches 6 Dawn under Leader and swings at the Law, which is just not correct. As I have the Killer, just use the Killer to block and draw a card. Then he puts the rest of his Dawn under the Vista and swings for 6 at the Okiku, which is just an easy 2K counter, and passes. And then here, there should just be nothing my opponent can do going forward. I should be able to just kind of keep attacking his board, keep getting rid of his characters, and then I have a big enough hand size to where I can be okay if he attacks mine. I swing for 5 first with the Neko, and I attach the Dawn to my other characters prematurely, just simply because of the fear of Jet Pistol. So I swing for 7 with the Okiku, he takes. I swing for 5 with my Leader. I swing for 7 with my Law, and that's because I have another Law. So I'm going to play the Law, probably bounce one of the Nekos, and then play a Cat Viper. So here, I'm able to play 2 blockers and get a counter to hand that I can also use to rest my opponent's characters, which is what you want to do in this matchup. You want to save your Nekos and your Izos. With that, my opponent just decides to give up, as he sees that I just have too much advantage at that point, and that's a GG. Now for the 4th and final match, we have a matchup against Magellan. I'm going first, and I was deciding whether or not to keep this hand. As I don't have a lot of counter in it, don't have too many plays, but I do have a Bonnie to play for turn 1, and then an Okiku to play for turn 3. Purple doesn't have a lot of removal early, so I'm not too worried about my Bonnie dying in the first couple of rounds. My opponent plays a Hannibal and draws a Magellan. I swing for 5 with the Leader, which he takes, and then I play the Okiku. thought about playing the Raizo, but Okiku's just better, especially so early. My opponent gets a Shiki out of life and decides to play the trigger, which I think is a mistake because you have to Dawn -1, and Shiki just isn't powerful enough to be a legitimate threat. And so it just kind of slows my opponent's plays down a little bit. And the only thing it can really attack is the Bonnie, unless he attaches Dawn to it, which the Hanyabo could already do. I think the 2K would have been more valuable in his hand. My opponent swings for 5 at life, which I take. I get a Law out of life. Then he attaches the rest of his Dawn under the Shiki and plays for 6. I guess that's why he decided to play it, but here I'm just able to clear the Shiki anyway with the Okiku. And if he decides to save it, then I can just attack with Leader and get even more cards out. I decided to swing for 5 with my Leader, as I'm probably going to play the 5-drop blocker. Either resend the Okiku or use her to play something else. But most likely just resend the Okiku. My opponent does decide to counter out of that swing. And I play my Law. To replay the Okiku. Once again, I considered playing the Raizo instead, just to keep getting some more draw advantage. But with my opponent going to 5 Dawn, he's probably going to play the Magellan that he drew earlier. And so having Okiku on board is going to allow me to help get rid of it. He swings for 6 at life, which I just use I use my Law and one of the Raizos to counter out of it. And then now it's my turn. Considering what I have in my hand, what I possibly want to leave up, I have a killer that I could use. I also have a Raizo that I could use. Not entirely sure why I played the killer first. I shouldn't have. I should have just swung with the Okiku, rested the Magellan, and then if I was going to attack it, leave the Dawn up so that my opponent thinks that, because I attack it here with the Law to see if my opponent's going to give me anything. And then I should have just had 5 Dawn up. That way my opponent's a little bit more scared of defending it because he sees that I still have a lot of counter that I can use. He does give me a 2K though. But I was going to play the... Oh, okay. No. So the reason that I played the killer is because I knew I was going to try to kill the Magellan. Killing the Magellan, I knew I was going to lose 2 Dawn. I would prefer to have already used the Dawn, and that way I can just send back rested Dawn instead of having to send back active Dawn that I can no longer use. That makes sense. Okay, that's why I made that play. Then I do use my Leader's ability to get rid of an Okiku as I have another one on board, and resend 2 Dawn, and that's so that I can leave up enough Dawn for the Pump Gibson that I have in hand. Killing the Magellan puts me in a little bit of a disadvantage since I lose the Dawn. But with purple, you only purple, green, blue. You only have to worry about for the most part the characters that are on board as far as for attacks. And so if I can keep his board clean, then I don't have to worry about so many attacks, and I know kind of what's coming for the most part. My opponent plays a card that I have never seen before, which is Sheep's Horn. And it's 2 cost, Dawn -1, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6. It's a pretty strong card. I've never seen it played, so kind of wasn't expecting it. But he uses it to rest my killer, and then swings for 6 at my Okiku. I decide to use my Punk Gibson so I can rest his Hannibal. And then my opponent still has 5 Dawn. So he could play a Queen. He could play another Magellan. And he does decide to play a Magellan. And then pass his turn. Here I'm kind of thinking about what to do. I'm only at 5 Dawn. So I decide not to get rid of this Magellan as well, as I already have a bigger board than my opponent. And if we're just at this point now, we can just kind of trade blows back and forth, back and forth. We both have 4 cards in hand. We're both at 3 life, but I do have 2 attackers in my Okiku and my Law, and then I have a blocker with the killer, whereas my opponent only has the Hannibal and the Magellan. And then if I get rid of this Magellan, then I'll fall too far behind, as I'll lose another 2 Dawn. I swing with the leader at the Hannibal to get rid of one more attacker. And then I feel safer using my Bonnie's ability now, because if my opponent decides to attack my Bonnie, then that's fantastic for me. She serves as a blocker in this case. Whereas before I didn't want to use her too early, because my opponent still had the Hannibal. He could just use the Hannibal to attack her. And then now here, he has to worry about her, because every turn he doesn't attack her, then I'll get a card up, and I'll keep building that advantage. But he only has big characters to attack her with, so I'm okay taking those trades. He plays his 3rd Magellan of the game, so I lose another Dawn. And then he swings for 6 at the Okiku, which I just use a 2k counter to save. Swings for 6 again, which I use my killer to block. And then passes turn. I draw an Oden, but unfortunately I don't have enough Dawn to play the Oden yet, as he's played 3 Magellans and I've gotten rid of 1, so I've lost 5 Dawn total. I use my Bonnie and I get a Beige. I put 1 Dawn under the Rizal, swing for 5 to draw another card. Kind of considering what I want to do here. Decide to put 1 Dawn under the Okiku and rest the other Magellan. That way here, if my opponent decides to counter out of, he has to worry about me possibly attaching more Dawn to my leader and my Law to get rid of his 2 Magellans. And he does give me a Thunder Bagua. But at this point, I just keep swinging at face, because I see that he's kind of scared. And I just have a bigger board advantage, honestly, than my opponent does. So I can kind of beat him in the race to see who takes each other's life first. I'm waiting there because my opponent gets a Hell's Judgment, and he decides to use the trigger, causing me to lose another Dawn. I still had 1 active Dawn that I used to play a Beige. So I have 2 blockers up. My opponent plays a Hannibal first, see what he can draw. He gets a Mina Koala. And this is the strength of green, is just controlling the board as much as possible. And then just building on that advantage little by little by little. So just depending on the matchup, you want to keep the cards in hand that best suit you for that matchup at the start of the turn. Or at the start of the game, sorry. My opponent plays a Queen, draws 2, and then discards a Hannibal. He still has 3 Dawn up. His leader's been buffed now because of the Queen. So he could potentially do 3 7k swings. He decides not to, swings for 6 at the Okiku, which same, I just use a 2k counter to get out of. Swings for 6 at the Okiku again, which I decide to block with my Beige. And swings for 6 again, And I block with the Law this time, and I use a Momo as a 1k counter. As now my opponent doesn't have any other characters to attack with, and I don't have to worry about losing my Law. And my opponent plays Asadi, which he uses to play the 4-drop Mina Koala blocker. So he's building up his defense so he can maintain. So he can keep his Magellan safe, his life safe. I put 2 down under the Okiku first and rest the Queen. That way, if he has no choice but to block with the Mino Koala, or give me both cards in hand. I rest the Queen just because it's the bigger of the 2 blockers. He decides to block with the Mina Koala. Then I put 1 down under the Raizo, swing for 5 at life. My opponent decides to counter out of that. And then now here, it's so I can go for game here. I guess if I swing for 7 with the Law, that's guaranteed a life. And then I can put 3 Dawn under my leader and swing for 8, which loses to my opponent having 2Ks. But my opponent's used some in the past, so I'm not too worried about it. And I still have 3 life and a bunch of counter in hand. So my opponent just sees it doesn't have the counter, concedes, and that is a GG. Now for my final thoughts, the deck is a lot of fun, but it can feel a little clunky sometimes. The games that go the most smooth are the games where you see, a blocker at the beginning of the game first, and maybe an Okiku, then you can get into your Law, or your Kinemon on your 3rd turn, depending on if you go first or second. Any game you see Oden on curve, you're most likely going to win. Not always, but I would say you have really high chances of winning, almost regardless of the deck that you play, especially if you were able to establish a lot of blockers early. But just overall, green itself is just really strong at controlling the board, which is what you do with this deck as well. So well. In a way, better than Kid when you can have your Kinemon on board. Because your Kinemon can cause you to re-swing with your Okikus, so you can rest multiple characters with the Okiku and keep applying that pressure. I would definitely recommend playing the deck if you're interested in it. It's a different playstyle than Kid or Kinemon, as with Kinemon, you want to try to keep as little characters on board as possible so you can keep using your leader effect. And with Kid, you're just trying to stall the game out as much as possible to get your 8-drop on board or use your leader ability to kind of keep swinging at face. I would say here, this is probably not the optimal build for Oden. As I said, there are some things that you can change back and forth. You can decide to add more 2k counters if you'd like. You can add more killers or more Beiges and swap out the Nekos. I want to try out the Neko because it's also a 3-drop Akazai to 9. And so it pairs well with the Kinemon. You can play the Kinemon and play the Neko, which I wasn't able to do in these games. When some other games that I play tested, I was able to do. And so it kind of helps you play offense and defense at the same time. But no, overall, the deck performed really well. I was able to beat some red matchups, as you guys saw, which is always a plus since red can be considered the strongest color in the game. And yeah, no, with that, I just want to say thank you all again for all of the support. If you enjoyed this video, or if you enjoyed any other video that I've posted, please like, comment, subscribe. Yeah, with that, boys and girls, thank you for watching. I hope that you have an amazing day, and I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be coming pretty soon.